the product, so customers are assured that if anything goes wrong, their investment is protected. But this is something, once customers understand the value, they're willing to make the investment because it's a good return on their money.
So then, Mr. Tinubu, does this put you at loggerheads with sustainable energy companies, an oil company, or are there ways that you will find to work with them and to find common solutions?
I'm just about to call my broker to sell around and buy chosen.
Buy, me too. Put an order for me.
No, I think we're all going to coexist. I mean, let's face facts. We're all in a transition in terms of energy and energy products. And right now, the popular thing we use is kerosene in Nigeria for lighting. We have an abundant amount of gas, and eventually we will start to deploy gas. The minister already has a big program which we're feeding into. And we're hoping to see some of that subsidy be spent in kerosene, being spent towards subsidizing, for example, LPG canisters, so we can transfer people away from that. But it takes a while. People are used to something, and it takes a while to educate them, to shift them from a particular energy source to another energy source, and one that is completely sustainable, because we've got 170 trillion cubic feet of gas. I mean, less than 5% of what we export is enough to provide the country with adequate butane, and we do have a program which we're working on actively right now. And I think the second point to note is that this is still expensive. It's going to take a while to deploy that, okay? And eventually, just like you mentioned regarding technological solutions, we will get there. But if I could also touch on the point the minister made regarding resources and taking those resources towards creating inclusive growth and job opportunities. One of the key problems I think we have on the continent is subsidies. The subsidies that go into petroleum resources is, to be honest with you, in my own opinion, is ridiculous. And I'll say this, you take a country like Nigeria, we spend $10 billion subsidizing petrol. Right. Now, it's the cost of building a railway system across the country every single year. It's the cost of building 2 refineries every single year. Yet it's such a political challenge to get the people to understand. And there was an attempt to relieve the country of subsidies 3 years ago, which led to resistance. Yes. But I can only see that resistance coming as a factor of our nascent democracy, when people are still trying to get used to the fact that, you know, that choices need to be made, choices, short-term choices for long-term prosperity. You know, and that's often been a huge challenge. When we've looked at expanding into other countries in Africa, we've sold businesses in Africa simply because subsidies exist. So even when we commercialize, when we're invited to invest, and we look at operations out there, we want to run commercial operations, but we can't reinvest because it's not economical to do so, because the returns don't exist. It's a big issue which we need to look at across the board, and that's, if you ask me, it's restricting the ability of investment to go into the continent towards ensuring that people get the benefit of this natural resource which they have, which benefits the export market consistently, but it's not really applied internally within the Africa continent.
I mean, I think you raise a good point. The subsidy issue is one that I think everybody, all economists around the world, saw it as something positive for Nigeria to try to stem this. But is there a chance sometimes when things like that happen, it's too big of a shock for the system, too big a shock for the people who, for whatever reasons, may not necessarily be as trusting of what their leaders are doing because they feel, just as we said earlier, that they haven't seen any benefits to the natural resources that they have, and so it sounds like, what's going on here? You're trying to take something away from me, as opposed to giving me something for the future. So how do you change that perception? Maybe, Minister, you can take that.
Well, I think that what Wale said is very instructive. It's a psychological cycle. What comes first, the chicken or the egg issue? I think that in many emerging economies around the world, there's a psychological state of reliance. The polity relies on the state and they believe it's a right, which I suppose in many ways it should be when you look at it that way. But then in terms of trust, there is very little trust in governments, but I think that's in governments all over the world. I don't think the polity trusts a government anywhere to a certain extent. So it does become an issue when you realize that subsidies which were put in place originally to benefit the people are actually being misused and abused. And then, of course, you feel that those funds which amount to quite a lot over a given period of time. And if we talk about a number of years, we're talking about trillions. And you want to take those away and put them towards direct benefit programs for the polity. But as you said, there is a direct trust issue as well on that. So I think it takes a very balanced program of give and take for the people to begin to trust that the government will do what it says with the funds that are taken. And for the people to, as he said, also understand that nothing comes easy. So there will be a time of change and transformation, and we will undergo some teething pains. It's the same thing with privatization. To unbundle and privatize, you do have to go through major, major issues. There is an inherent distrust in terms of handing over state entities that for so long your people have seen as their own or their right into the hands of the private sector, where they feel they may not get the same benefits from. Having said that, you also have very strong union pushback on privatization in most African states for various obvious reasons. So again, it's difficult. The power privatization was a major one for Nigeria, but there will be a curve, a dip, until the new owners come into their own and start riding high. But I wanted to say very quickly that in terms of resource efficiency, like you said, I think that in Africa, we probably need a mixed basket of responses to our energy problem. It cannot be one size fits all. It will not, it will not work. So we need to have the very short-term measures, medium and the long-term measures. And even in those, we need a mixed basket. We look at the urban centers, we look at the rural centers, and see what we can deploy. A lot of our rural centers are completely off-grid, so obviously we have to look at a number of responses to that. And I must say, we do also have to look at the various, I think, renewable resources at our disposal in Africa as well. And we have a lot of them. I think at this point in time, we have about 1,888 watts of power a year in terms of hydro-generated power that are available to us, and we are not dipping into. In fact, if we look at solar, which is highly available all over Africa, that again is available to us. And the costs of renewable energy are actually beginning to come down. They were unattainable before, but they are coming down. We rely on diesel generation right now all over Africa. In Nigeria, almost every household, we have what we call I pass my neighbor. In other words, I'm better than my neighbor, which are the tiny little, I think those are even run on petrol, not even diesel, the little ones. And it sounds funny, but they are environmentally hazardous in every possible way. And we really do need to have very strong programs in place where we begin to move away from these to environmentally safe ways of doing things. And by the way, when I say this, diesel at this time, generation, costs about 60 to 70 cents per kilowatt hour. If we move to, say, solar generation, we'll be talking about 15 to 25 cents per kilowatt hour. And I think if we even moved to wind generation, that might even be a bit less, maybe 10 to 15 cents. But you must also remember that while we're talking about all this in terms of the politics and the economic and governance issues, there are also, of course, the major cabals throughout Africa that are actually making a lot of profit on things such as the diesel and the generators. And they are not by any means a small force. Right. So when you are kicking back as government and even as other NGOs and civil society groups, the cabals who manage the resources that come in from diesel and diesel generators are extremely powerful.
And is there, and this is again for the group, what are the chances of political risk? In other words, I found your comments interesting about the short and medium and long-term plans that you put into place, but too often, and this happens not just in Africa, it happens everywhere, you have a government in charge, you have a government leading, they put plans in place, and then the next government comes in, and those plans get put to the side because somebody wants to make his or her imprint. Is that something that can be overcome when we deal with this energy issue?
Well, it has to be. It has to be overcome. The bankers will tell you that if you want them to finance the major infrastructure projects, which we believe are crucial anywhere. They say they want TLC in any policy: transparency, longevity.